Want to share your skills, build with others, and grow your resources together? Well, come dip it. Do you want to share your
You guys
skills,
can hear okay?
build with others,
Yeah, yeah.
and grow your
Great.
resources together? Well, come dip a toe into the world of commitment pooling. Humans can be pretty good at cooperating, and pretty much every culture in the world has its version of what we call commitment pooling. Here in coastal Kenya, it's called Mweria, a centuries-old system where neighbors promise labor to each other in turn so that no household faces big tasks alone. What we've done with the Sarafu network is combine the wisdom of these traditions with modern tools, using blockchain to make commitments visible, traceable, and easy to coordinate, while keeping the heart of the practice in human relationships. There are two basic elements: vouchers, which can be thought of like gift cards for a group or individual's goods or services, and commitment pools. A commitment pool is like a collection of promises that people or groups agree to exchange fairly between each other according to some simple rules. On the Sarafu network, people and groups can set up vouchers and commitment pools to exchange goods and services or coordinate working together towards common goals. Imagine 3 families get together at the start of a growing season and agree that each can afford to offer up to 4 days of labor on their neighbors' farms. Each family creates 4 labor vouchers representing their promises and seeds the pool with 2 each. Seeding is how trust starts to grow. Each family's initial promise or debt to the network that they can be counted on for up to 2 days of work. They also agree to set a limit to the vouchers they can place in the pool, so at no point could any one family owe more than 4 days of work. Family A wants help to build a new granary. They swap in 2 more of their own vouchers as a promise to repay 1 voucher they borrow from Family B and 1 voucher from Family C. The 3 families get together for the day of construction, after which Family A returns Family B and C's vouchers because the promise of a day's work has been fulfilled. Next, Family B decides to build a granary and puts 2 of its vouchers in the pool, borrowing a voucher from Family A and Family C. At the end of the building day, Family B returns Family A and Family C's vouchers. Finally, it's Family C's turn to build a granary, so they swap in 2 of their own vouchers and borrow 1 voucher from Family A and Family B. The families get together and build the granary. Family C returns Family A and Family B's vouchers. The pool returns to its starting balance, but now there are 3 new granaries, stronger ties between families, and a living record of commitments made and kept. Commitment pools work a lot like credit unions, where, in exchange for seeding the pool with commitments for some of your assets, you gain access to credit to the goods and services of other people, which can unlock a lot of economic activity, even in the absence of national currency. Commitment pools have also proved very useful, getting money from philanthropic organizations to groups on the ground actually distributing aid and working in various communities. An initial amount of currency seeds the pool, and then the groups are able to kick off their own pools where goods and services can continue circulating after being seeded by the initial infusion of currency. What kind of projects would you like help with? Come check out the Sarafu network and get your toes wet with some grassroots economics and the world of commitment pooling.
I should have let it continue to play with the music taking us out of that. That was great. Well, I love these videos. For those who don't know, if you get a chance, head over to the Grassroots Economics YouTube channel, which I'll put in chat here real quick. Will's channel has a lot of introductory videos as well as he even goes into how his model works on different videos as well, and some of the struggles that he's faced and how he's sort of tackled that over time. So, Will, I just love that you have so much information out there. So, guys, excuse me, I got a couple more people coming in. Um, Dave Winslow, I'm going to make you a co-host if you can. If we have other people coming in, if you can just let people in. Thank you so much. All right, everyone. So normally we have about 5 minutes or so where everyone's just sort of chatting amongst themselves before we kick this off. But today I chose to put up the video, which I thought was a great introduction to why we're here and what lens we'll be interviewing from today. In chat, I've put a link to Will's speaker sheet, as well as it has information in there as far as some background information and what we're going to be talking about today. For those of you who are new to regenerative iteration, this is not a talking head series. So we're going to let Will come on and talk for about 5 minutes or so and sort of set the stage and what we're going to be interviewing about. And then we're just going to jump into questions and really kind of look at what does these things take to get going? What are the struggles that we face along the way? How do we deal with emergence and how do we sort those things out? And ultimately, we know that regeneration isn't easy. This is really, really hard. So we're trying to be the anti-talking head series to really ground regeneration in reality. So for
Mm,
that, we're
yeah.
all grateful that you guys are here. And with that, Will, so glad you're here. Um, I I had a just so you guys all know, I had a one-to-one with Will that I honestly, because I had come down to Florida, I didn't put enough research time into it. And sometimes when you go into people and you look at the breadth of how much work they've done and how much impact they've made, I felt very remiss afterwards. And Will, you have such a breadth of experience, and we're so grateful to have you in the group. So welcome, and we'd love to sort of just hear a little bit about you and what's getting you excited and maybe some of the things you're working on right now. And if we can limit that to like 5 to 10, and then we'll jump into questions.
Okay, great. Thanks. Good to be here with everybody. Thanks, Sage. Um, hmm, um, well, so I guess one thing that frames my kind of journey through this stuff is my life as a physicist was kind of this question of like what's this whole reality about? I grew up in a very new age family, and my kind of rebellion against energy workers and Reiki masters was to go into physics. And so my I wanted to know what energy was. I wanted to understand why we interact with each other as well. And I ended up going into something during a master's before I went to my doctorate on econophysics, which was just trying to model like how do people interact, and can we sort of understand some axiomatic like basic functionality and protocols around how humans interact with each other, and sort of use kind of so a lot of the statistics and math that we use in physics. So that's kind of got me on this route, and I fell in love with the concept of community currencies. So the more I started looking at economics, I was like, oh, there's all these beautiful engineering kind of problems, and the state of the art at the time, this is maybe like in Y2K, was community complementary and community currencies. And I started going and studying those projects all around the world. And I decided I was going to leave physics and economics and join the Peace Corps and come to Kenya after studying those programs all over the place. And so I left the US. I felt like I escaped in some sense. Like I felt like I just a huge liberation just leaving. Um, and I've been here ever since 2008. And I would come into community groups, eventually started a local organization here called Grassroots Economics Foundation. It's a nonprofit. And I would show them videos of like how things had been done in like Curitiba, Brazil, or Bancos Palmas, or Berkshire, Massachusetts, and looking at all these different kind of models for local money. And then it was about 10 years of doing that. I mean, we did a lot of different work in different communities. The government took us to jail. We were accused of secessionism. We won court cases that proved that communities can do this, that it wasn't illegal. We had a lot of ups and downs, and but generally, really, really positive results. And when we digitized these systems, we were using pieces of paper when we first started. When we digitized them, we noticed there's community groups that were doing like 20 times the amount of um, flows and exchanges amongst each other. And when we go and see these groups, they were building houses and doing all this amazing stuff. And versus these other groups, the ones that I was more maybe involved with, are mostly just doing kind of like get together market days, like little swap meets and stuff like that. And so what were these groups doing? And what the way they would describe it is that they were doing something that their ancestors or grandparents or even parents had done, and even some of them that were maybe over 40 years old or 50, they remember doing as kids, and they would call it mueria or mueria. And it was a ancient resource coordination system. So all they were using these little digital tokens, these little vouchers that they were making at the time was for the accounting of a very, very ancient practice. So I was like, oh my gosh, and so the last, 5, 6 years has just been to really understand what is that practice, and then finding that indigenous and traditional communities all around the world have almost all the exact same practice. That was just like, oh crap, right? Like that I thought I understood about economics. And I mean, I've read a lot of books and even David Graeber's and, Maus, and, I've heard about things like gift economies, but I didn't really get that there were protocols to all of that. Like what were the sort of basic protocols, like kind of you would think as like a physicist of resource coordination in living systems in people, and seeing that, you have the almost exact same practice as called Minka in South America, and Mehel and Mahel or something like this in Gaelic, Mueria here, and there's a million names for the exact same practice. This appears to be pre-religious, pre-lingual even, going so far back. Um, that just blew my mind. And I sort of, we know that like we didn't start economic systems with pure barter, that there was a myth of that. Like you get taught that in school, like, oh, we started with barter, then we went to money. We always knew that was a myth, but I didn't really have a fill in for what was there before. And we would say things like gift economy. So, anyways, long story short, it has been a pleasure to basically take the concept of money as commitment. That's really been a huge thing. That so like an expression of intention, like I commit to offering some resources. That's basically how we've encapsulated what money was. It's a very like yang like expression. It's a value expression. Anyone can express that, right? Anyone could say, Sage can say, I'm going to make an IOU, and that's my little token, my monopoly money or whatever. Everyone can do that. And the Romans did it. They called it moneta, money. That's where we get the term money from. And every nation state is going to follow this modality. And um, this other thing, that we saw these communities doing was very much more of like a yin to me practice of holding space, right? So the currency is completely decentralized. It's not the medium of exchange. What you have instead is a space that enables flow to happen, right? So wonderful. Everyone express your value. It's a little bit like everyone has a butthole. Okay, great. Like enjoy those. But we need a space that enables flow to happen so we don't end up in stagnation or domination. Um, so that's been a beautiful journey for me, and we have a book out just recently, and there's a free audiobook and PDF as well. We can put the website up there, and um, and then we have software that we've built this sort of that takes these protocols and says, well, can we express them kind of like a gene expression into different environments? And that's been the going into community of practice. And then also, can we federate across? What is that protocol, first of all? And can it actually, can it not scale itself, but can it connect to scale, right? Can it grow kind of horizontally, like, like mycorrhizal fungi would connect resources and enable flows of them to happen? And so that's a beautiful process that's growing and growing right now. So I think I'm sure I did over 5 minutes there, but thank you.
No, that was awesome. That was awesome. I was letting it flow, and you guys, I put a link to the book in chat so you guys can check that out. His book, I think I found chapters even online. So you're very gracious with making your content accessible. So I appreciate that quite a bit. Thank you for the overview, and let's jump into the questions. So question number one, you guys see, I'm following all on the sheet here. As new people coming in and out, as I notice we have new people, you might see me repaste this in the chat. I'm not trying to be annoying. I'm just trying to get that last person who just came in so they also have access to this. And if I'm annoying, it's okay. So number one, you described money as a shared story, and you kind of described the story a little bit yourself on here. So how has your personal story really lended to you changing your views on the conventional economic system? Like you kind of described some of that, but is there anything to add sort of around this? And you're on
I mean,
mute.
yeah, coming into this, there was a lot of energy and impetus around like, can we just, like intentional communities, like, can we somehow go kind of cold turkey on national currency, and I think over time it's been a little bit like saying, well, can we instead look at national currency as it is right now as sort of like a mixture between like training wheels on a bicycle and methadone to heroin, right? Like, can we, like if we think about ourselves in an addictive situation, or at least, a dependent situation, how do we heal the body? And that's been a really healthy way for me to sort of view national currencies as commitments of the state. And we might not like those commitments. I mean, a little bit like the Roman mafia, you know, we would recognize the same, the term money and the general monetary system we have now is still very much in the lineage. It's a tradition, that the Romans would have called it moneta, and there, it was passed down into what we have today. But one thing I would just say is that, like, when I'm working with community groups, I get asked quite often for loans. And that's been a really simple way to sort of explain what we do as a community here. Like, I don't want to go into direct lending arrangements with people. I want to instead say, like, Sage, you need $10 or you need some resources I have. Well, is there something that you can also give back to this as a commons? So if I'm holding now Sage's debt, is that ours? Can I hold, what's the collateral in a sense? What's the hours of Sage's time that somebody else might in the community might need? So I don't need to end up with a one-to-one debt with Sage. I can make that debt move with the communities, and we can settle these things together. And so anyway, that's my personal relationship with money has become much more about kind of composting it into relational networks, and that it's still super important. It's not
Mhm.
like I'm never telling people never stop use money again, but how can we actually enter into become people? That's the tradition. Like Ubuntu means to become a person. Ubuntu,
Mhm.
like that practice is to enter back into relational networks with each other. And so I think we can use money in that way. And again, it's a little bit like training wheels and methadone, like the, you know, there's a lot around balance. There's a lot around health that needs to be there. Yeah.
So I got some questions from Dennis in chat, but Dennis, I'm going to wait until we get more into the Seraphim network, and then I'll ask some of those. It'll be in better context there. Well, I'm going to move on to the next question on this one. What is grassroots economics? Okay, let me stop for a second. Your whole way of building a whole network that was built on indigenous wisdom, and it was something that was already there, and sort of putting a framework around it to allow it to be possibly more portable and maybe more widely adapted on here. When you started seeing this and you started seeing this impact in traditional monetary networks, to include even how the bank system would sort of fuel those networks, when you look at grassroots economics now, how do you feel that's helping that gap, and how do you feel it's really working to regenerate that community better than traditional economic models?
Well, I mean, I live in a village here, and we see something like 10 of these Mueria cycles going around every week with about 4 or 5 different groups. And, there's a house that comes up every week right now. There is, farms being developed. And so there's a huge amount of, I mean, if we just look at this as, just, pure, resource development within that community, you would say, wow, these guys are doing huge, huge amounts of volume of valuable work and resource development with each other. So I think that's been really powerful just to see from that side. But there's a lot of other stuff going on in terms of that I can call someone when there's an emergency or I need help, right? So like this idea of as a community coming together and pooling resources or commitments toward resources, even intangible pooling going on, that I can pull from that when I need to. I can also give to it, and it gives me a relationship with my neighbors. That's been just amazingly beautiful. So I feel like there's a lot. I mean, so when we look out at all the resources that are moving around these networks right now, but there's stats on the website as well, sarafu.network. You can kind of look at reports and there's a map. You can see like kind of reports of what's going on. There's just a lot. There's a lot. I mean, there's groups in Italy doing this with olive oil harvesting, for instance, and labor and actually trading olive oil with each other. Um, there's groups in Ukraine doing a lot of regenerative agriculture work, dealing with war-torn Ukraine, and really beautiful. And they have the same name for this tradition. It's called Toloka in Ukraine. So there's a lot going on there. And again, yeah, like you said, there's nothing new about this. What's really what's new is that um, we're just trying to create kind of what's a minimal grammar for collaboration, and once you have a minimal grammar for collaboration, and you've got some axiomatic kind of functional mechanisms, you can do science on that, right? And that's what I've been missing in economics for years and years is just like, well, how do I build on this a science of economics without some sort of basic understanding of what resource coordination and cooperation is? And so that's been a huge thing for me personally, and just the book and just expressing like when I work with community groups, all kinds like cooperatives, church groups, Islamic finance groups, all I'm really doing is saying, how are you cooperating right now? What are you actually already doing? And can I express those things into a very simple framework that we can now treat in a scientific way that we can build on, right? That we instead of just waving our hands and saying, "Oh, good cooperation, yada yada," like
Yeah.
what's really going on there? So pulling that into grammar, pulling it into protocol, that's been really, really useful. And that's how we've been able to also express those same grammars into things like a blockchain, using decentralized databases and stuff like that to have memory systems, authentication, and rule following systems so we can express these kind of resource sharing agreements. Yeah.
And so everyone knows the Seraphim network is expressed over blockchain. So as transactions occur within those community pools, they're using the blockchain as a ledger that just doesn't go away. So it's ingenious to combine those together, and it does allow for that decentralized oversight.
Oh, lost you, Sage. Voice, your audio as
Just
well.
put yourself on mute, buddy.
I muted myself on accident.
I
Sorry, I was trying to
I
let someone
did it.
breathe.
I'm sorry. Apologies.
Oh, David didn't want me talking anymore. He's like, dang it, you've talked too much. All right. So the next question, I'm gonna get to some of Dennis's questions. Dennis, you've put a barrage of questions in there. So I'm gonna go through a couple of these first and we'll address the rest as we can here. So the first one, I'm gonna combine these two questions. So Dennis is asking about how the system sort of balances for individual families with unique or rare high demand skills. But then he also goes into ask like, how do we balance the system for families with high needs but low skills to offer? And then how does the system handle families who maybe have big needs, but they're not committing or working through that? So there's a couple questions around balance within the system. So if we could talk about community pools, where do you see some of the struggles within those being successful, and where have you had to spend extra time to try to work through that balance?
Yeah. So, one thing is to not think about a pool as like a self-contained community itself. It's really, like for instance, if we take this as kind of an much more abstract concept, we would say, well, Sage and I, we had a commitment that I was going to come give a talk at this, and he was going to arrange people to come speak or come be part of this. And like, this was very an unsaid agreement, but then we came up with this date where we did this thing, and we're here on this date, and we've done this thing, and we're doing it, and that process of sharing our commitments with each other and fulfilling them is building this little trust between us. Now, Sage and I know each other a bit more. All of us on this call are somehow, in some sort of a state of becoming people together, as a group. and you guys have been maybe doing this for months and months and years, that these types of events, so you're just getting to know each other. And um, so when I think about, like the relative high needs groups, I'm thinking of like, okay, I might be in a network where I've expressed my needs together with, one or two people in a family, and there's a lot outside of there that we're not self-sufficient as a family whatsoever. There's a lot of other things we need. And so what happens in a pooling structure is that, and I don't, we should, a little bit in the cartoon showed this, but the idea is that you end up with linkages between different pools, right? So you're in a subpool here as between you and your wife, or you and your family. And then that pool, because you have commitments in that group as well as other groups, you act as a link between that other group. And so when we're looking at a village group, you could think of it as a single pool, but really it's actually a network of pools. It's a network of agreements that link everyone together. And the real sort of like intangible commons is that network, right? And so if we sort of decentralize the commitment itself into a pool or network of pools, and we decentralize a pool into kind of a egregore or a massive network of pools, then that's more like what we're talking about. And you have routing through those systems. Like in a village, you might have, your grandma provides trust and routing through this village to the next clan, because she's going to introduce you to Uncle Bob, and things like that. So you end up with routes through those networks, and there's some good kind of network diagrams and stuff maybe we can look at later. But that's kind of what I wanted to express, is that when you have networks, um, and routing through networks, like the ability to move and connect, it's a little bit like a Visa and MasterCard situation. Visa and MasterCard was just an agreement. This guy, D. Hawk, wrote a beautiful book about this and his history on it. But he got a bunch of banks to say, can we create a credit network that would route debts from bank to bank to bank, right? And the banks were initially very much like, oh my gosh, I'm never going to sign this agreement with another bank. But he convinced them that there was a huge win-win scenario of connecting those pools together to form a massive routing network. And yes, like what usually happens in um, resource coordination systems that are highly effective is that they become enclosed, right? And so this is what, the Romans did by saying, you can only use our token as the medium of exchange, or else we're going to kill you, for instance, right? And this is how BlackRock, for instance, creates a massive pool of resources, enables people to access them, and then tries to enclose them so it becomes illegal to create your own pools or to create other forms of resource exchange. So, that there's something to talk about there in terms of, what.
Well,
Yeah,
let
yeah,
me sorry, let me abbreviate this a
yeah,
little
yeah,
bit. Guys, to just specifically tie back into some of your questions, Dennis, we were looking at like how do you handle families that are unwilling to work? I'd like to answer that a little bit, and Will, tell me if I'm off on this one. From what I've seen so far is as you create resources pool, the tokens that a family puts in there are limited tokens, meaning as you build more credit within the network, you can be allowed to add more to that network. But this prevents over extraction of a network on how much one community or one person within that pool can leverage that network. So there's a limited way they can leverage it and a limited way they can extract from that or, supply into it. And as that trust increases, only then, can those, as they select, add more to that community pools and thus able to get more work out of it. But again, as soon as you don't have that law of reciprocity and come back into support on that, you're just going to be out of tokens. You're not going to be able to do that again. So I love how it does help balance itself based on how you set up those commitment pools. And well, did I explain that right? Or is there anything you want to pivot off of there?
Yeah, that was well done, Sage. I mean, so that's one of the core elements, one of the core functions of the protocol is how do you limit reciprocal access to these? What's your, if you're in a commons, Ostrom would have called this like your membrane or your boundary of the commons. Like, how do you let stuff in versus let stuff out? What does that look like? And one thing maybe to add, Sage, is that, it's not necessarily tit for tat. Like, I promise to do this and you're going to give me some stuff. It can simply be certifications. So a certification, like an attestation, is a way to say like a diploma that I certify or I commit that Sage passed his, fifth grade math. I don't know if he did, Sage, but we'll say maybe he did. And
Jury's
and
out.
so yeah, there's that. we'll do a test later. Then we have, so we said, okay, great, Sage has the certificate, and therefore we're going to give anyone with that particular certificate this kind of, again, limited, but access to X, Y, and Z. So if you're an elder in the community or you're a child, you have access maybe to my daughter has access to the refrigerator in the house. So there's a limit on that. There's a curation of what we value, what certificates, what services are allowed to come into the pool and use the resources of the pool. There's relative valuation, like what is valuable within the network. Like for instance, can she eat the whole jar of peanut butter or just a spoon, right? And then there's limits on, you know, when she can access, how she can access it, what specifically things can be accessed within that. And then there's things like scheduling, right? Like, oh, we're going to access that commons at breakfast and dinner, you know? And so those in some ways are a very simple way to look at these kind of four protocols, four functional protocols within the commitment pooling framework. Yeah.
Thank you so much. Tanuja has a really brilliant question here, and it's got some love on it as well. But Tanuja, on this one, I don't want to mess it up when I ask it. So do you want to come off of mute real quick and ask your question?
Sorry. I actually had a second question as well. Hello, Will. Nice to see you again. Before I ask the one in the chat, may I ask another one, Sage?
Of course.
Yes. So I wondered, one of the things that I find very difficult to swallow is all these refugee camps around the world that were meant to exist for 12 months, but now are 40 years old. And each is trying, why can we not build an economy within that so that then they become absorbed in a regenerative way into the bigger economy?
Mm. It is happening. I mean, we've worked for the last 5 years in about 3 different refugee camps, and all around the the Somali border here, and up in Turkana towards Sudan. And one is that all those cultures do have these same practices, and so we do a lot of resource coordination in those groups in beautiful ways. But just in general, like several generations now have been in there, 30 plus years in many of them. And Dadaab is like 400,000 people. In Kakuma and Kalobe, and the Kenyan government has they're starting to, it's a settlement now. There's even pathways to get local citizenship, go to local schools. And so there's a lot of skills there. In fact, a lot of those camps are more resourced than a lot of the villages we work in. It's a very interesting, and a lot of the people migrating into those camps are very skilled laborers, families that had the means to even do that. Most of the villagers still back in that previous country, right? So in some ways, those are somehow resourced and skilled individuals. So there's a lot of skills there, and so it's just a matter of saying, well, how do we coordinate all those skills? So that our general approach is to look at what we call a visionary process, where we look at what is your individual family or group vision for what you want to do in the next year. We do a lot of drawing. There's a lot of fun exercises around that. And then we look at all the resources that you have available. So we look at social resources, belonging to different groups, political skills, labor, sense of purpose, infrastructure, natural resources, economic resources. And we say, okay, well, how do we put that together? Because usually, if we went around this group right here, we would say we have extreme abundance. Absolutely. Every group I've ever been in, every village, when they actually go through all the resources that they have, they're in abundance. We're all in abundance, yet we're in complete scarcity mindset, right? And so here's all these resources we have. How do we put them into use in a fair way toward all of our visions, collective and individual? And what's nice in Africa is, especially these camps, is that there's a history and a social memory of a completely different non-capitalistic tradition. And they all have a different name for it. And in general, we're saying commitment pooling. In academia, you would hear something like rotational labor associations or gift economies, but it's very particular, and it has a very particular protocol. And so what we're usually doing is just pulling all of those resources into things like gift cards, like witnessed signed commitments, right? Like a bus ticket, right? And then we're pooling those together and giving borrowing access to that pool, right? Very witnessed, very transparent, right? very legal as well. You know, in terms of like dispute resolution and sanctions, like when people don't honor their commitments, what are the sanctions for that? And then all of a sudden, you know, Sage has access to borrow 10 times what he could have before, and he can pay it back in kind to the group. And a zero interest loan that you can pay back in kind is essentially a salary. Think about that for a second, right? Everyone wants a salary and a job in a lot of these places. Well, what if that salary and job was literally access to a bunch of resources and you can pay back in kind over time? And as soon as you pay back in kind in time, you can take your next salary, right? Well, that's a really powerful system. And then we have Red Cross and World Food Program also pumping in every once in a while, quite fairly randomly, the training wheel slash methadone money into those pools as well, right? That's another resource. That's, you know, and we're trying to de-addict from that resource, but it's still super, super important. Yeah. Okay.
Thank you very much. I don't know if I still have time, but if I do, I just wanted to say,
If we can make it a quick one. Otherwise,
Yeah.
I got so many questions in chat. I got two people with raised hands.
Yeah.
So let's go. We're going to go a little faster here. Go ahead, please.
yeah, not a question, just a comment, but what you're flipping of the focus on relationality creates a non-pathological assumption at the
Yeah.
basis of an economy. So wonderful.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. Thanks. Good to see you again also.
Yeah, I'm not sure how useful that is, Tanuja. There's a lot of pathology out there.
All right, guys. So I have a dentist question, and Dr. Brian and Rick, I see you both with your hands up. Dr. Brian, your question's after Dennis's, and so I'm going to let you come off, and you can ask your question in chat, or but give us 1 second here. So Dennis had to ask a question: what is the protection against external forces such as large investments, taxes, expenses, pulling resources away from the village or the pool? Do we have a? Go ahead.
You know, in terms of kind of like nuclear deterrence, or, you know, when we think about like, you know, am I going to be able to dominate or extract from this pool? Quite often the question is, well, can the people involved in that pool reform and bypass me if I did so, right? So if I'm going to dominate a network, or I'm going to create the, you know, the BlackRock or whoever, Bill Gates version of this, and try to enclose everyone into it, you know, if I'm going to try to dominate this group here, but you guys could just continue on without me, I'm much, much less likely to do it, right? So mostly what we're trying to do is just make these systems really easy to self-propagate and be created. So, you know, allow community groups to kind of cross-pollinate very, very radically. I mean, even like in Kenya right now, it just became illegal last year to trade indigenous seeds, like maize seeds and stuff like that. So, you know, like that's sort of the enemy in a sense, right? Like the enclosure and extraction, you know, system. So if we can create systems where it becomes completely normal to be able to exchange and bypass national currencies, well, that can be quite beautiful. So that's been sort of the method, and not try to, you know, like the defense in my point of view is kind of radically being able to connect.
Dr. Brian, you're next, and then Rick, you'll be on deck here. So Dr. Brian, please come off of mute if you'd like, and ask away.
Yeah, well, it's great to hear about your journey. And you seem to have landed on your feet in Kenya, which is very impressive. We've had a similar transition, let's say, to Australia here. And I'm just curious, you know, we're in the process of finding our community. So I'm really curious about, you know, you've gone and selected a community to live in. It's place-based. I imagine you're doing it there. How much of this is place-based, and what did you look for in finding your community physically, place-based community, and doing it again? What prioritize in terms of the characteristics of the fertile soil that enable this to propagate, you know, these kind of collective systems to propagate really effectively?
Yeah, good question. I feel like it, you know, it more chose me than I chose it. But what's been effective here is that I have a lot of neighbors who are fairly independent. They all have their, you know, from a half acre up to a few acres of land. There there's a lot of dignity and remembrance of culture, but this isn't a historic indigenous place for anyone. People migrated here to sort of meet the Arabs about 50, 60 years ago. And so it's kind of a newish settlement somehow. And so people are they're excited and willing to connect and remember old practices and do things together. A pool doesn't start empty. There's got to be some sort of seed in there. And I've found that there was enough seed there in the local community and with us here as well that we could kind of kickstart a lot of these processes going. And that's really just blossomed into, 10 plus of these activities going on every week. And a lot and just, joy and connection and fun. And there's a lot of also like celebration as well. Um, and at the same time, like the youth, mostly we're connecting a lot with the elders and like the women of the village, and a lot of the men and younger men are off trying to get money. And that's
Yeah.
now coming back where the men are starting to see that, oh, actually, there's a lot of resources in this community that they can actually use. And so that shift is starting to happen. And versus some communities I've lived in, that tension was way too much. Or, so, like everyone's just desperately trying to get money constant. Lived in a lot of slums, urban settlements where that was too much. So I feel like there was some breathing room here and connection between neighbors that could be happening, and sort of some space for this stuff to form, and then some seed as well. So, yeah.
Interesting. Are you rural or peri-urban or something else? And I would ask, I'm reminded of
Yeah.
the saying that if you can find fertile soil, it's 5 times less work than trying to build a fertile
Yeah.
place on
Yeah.
on a barren soil. What are
Yeah.
as you're going around and sowing these seeds everywhere, what are the essential nutrients we should be aware of and when we're trying to build these communities?
I think it's existing trust networks is what you're looking for. That's the soil. And so,
Not
you know, that's it. I mean, really. And so in urban settlements and even refugee camps, we're looking at things like church fellowship groups, Islamic wafts, like endowment groups, any kind of group, a group that's been together long enough to know each other's names, like been, ideally even multi-generational, the better, that there's some existing
yeah.
trust. You're always building on existing trust. Yeah.
I love that. Okay, I'm going to look for these trust networks. My last question is, I'm seeing
Dr.
all
Brian,
these
I got to move
cracks
on.
in
You're
global,
getting three. That's more than anyone
yeah,
else.
currencies.
This do it if you don't
And
mind. Do it quick if you can, please. Go
it's
ahead.
it's real quick. It's real quick.
Okay.
The question
Okay.
is,
Go ahead.
do you see this and how does this displace, or is it a replacement for a lot of the crumbling fiat currencies that we're seeing around the world?
I think it's scaffolding, potentially. Like if you're a failing US dollar or a country with a currency, OPEC, for instance, like the petrol dollar, is really good for your currency, right? So if you're a crumbling currency and you see that millions of people around the country are going to denominate billions of dollars worth of their resources in your currency, well, they're actually doing you a huge service. They're making your currency real. So if the US dollar is collapsing and the US people want to scaffold it, they would actually make those services and stop the money printer and actually back it. And so that's the process I see happening even in Kenya here. There's a lot of these voucher systems and these pools that are denominating their services in the national currency. That's not bad for the national currency at all. And it's the opposite. It actually gives it some reality. So that's one way that we can look at sort of, if we look at a big fall about to happen, we can say, well, here's one way we can slow that fall down, right? So that we can actually have a smoother transition rather than a really dangerous abrupt one. Yeah.
Thanks.
Thank you so much, Dr. Brian. Those are all great questions. So, okay, I'm going to move on. Rick, I'm going to do two questions in chat real quick before I bring you up that were asked a little bit ahead of you here. So, the first one was from Jesse. Jesse asked a question: as you discovered the indigenous communities worldwide that share the similar resource coordination protocols, how do you maintain the essence or the spirit of the ancient practices when translating them into digital platforms, right? Which can be very kind of shallow and cold.
So one way to look at this is that they already have been, like, we never really stopped using them. We just kind of stopped looking at them, and they sort of morphed into different stuff. So like the traditional Mueria that you'll see the version of it today is a savings and loan group. They put money into a basket and they take turns borrowing from it. They use a lot of the exact same protocol. It's only that they're only using one type of an asset, money, right? So they've devalued all their other assets and say, this is the only one we're going to pool and borrow, right? So that's what's happened for the most part to a lot of these practices. So a lot of it's just going into those groups and saying, oh, wait, you have a lot more resources than that, don't you? Right? Can we actually acknowledge those other resources you have? And also not just that, be able to, you know, look beyond just money as a resource that we have, but also to federate across groups. And so I think, you know, if we come down to the sort of pulling out the protocols around these and looking at the traditions around them, there's a lot of things, you know, that like modern business contract or credit unions have done really excellent jobs of looking at constitutions and rules and democratic thinking around these types of systems. A lot of, you know, what we might say the very traditional ones also morph into things that become complete patriarchies and enclosures again, right, into them. So I don't really romanticize too much the quote unquote traditional practice. It's more just like, what are the protocols within those that enable people to coordinate resources? And note that most of these traditions came way before anything we talk about religion or even language itself in a lot of these groups. So we're not talking about like kind of honoring the, you know, a particular religious practice of some particular group. It's more like we're looking at how do living systems actually coordinate resources themselves. And that's been a really powerful frame. And I really actually avoid the term indigenous most of the time. We don't use it in Kenya at all. The earliest creation stories we have from all the tribes in Kenya is of migration. Every single one of them followed an elephant or a buffalo for like 500 generations across the entire continent until their creation stories are generally just the last migration with no, you know what I mean? So anyway, like the history of us moving far, far, far distances is the oldest history I even know about.
Thank you so much.
Over.
Next question from Fan had a quick question in chat. What would love to hear more about your experience in getting the right balance of state, market, and commons to meet those individual and community needs. Um, so I think it's just sort of a general, how do you set up, or Fan, do you want to come out if you had a specific question around this or a way to frame this? Let me see if I can find Fan.
I can jump in real quick.
Sure, go ahead.
So if we look at a pools of resources and we say, okay, can municipalities and states create social services and other things that are pooled that people have access to? Absolutely. And wonderful that they would. And if you think about the dollar, for instance, as a commitment of the state to offer services, right? Wonderful. Let's hold them to that commitment. Let's make those commitments quite real. If we, the more real we can make them, the better. And I think that's kind of I've seen in Italy there was an energy credit that was issued not that long ago. There was also state tax points that were issued that were able to start moving through these networks. So there was a lot of examples where, you know, when the state actually gets concrete on what their commitments are, you can get very beautiful outcomes around that. And I think, you know, like markets, you know, if you're when you create a pool, the way we've articulated pricing in that pool is that you have a vector in there. You have essentially like a price list that's relative value of those things in that particular pool, right? And what that does is it creates you could set all of those things at market rate to the dollar. So this is worth $1 worth of Sage's consulting. This is $1 worth of apples. This is $1 worth of, you know, Toys R Us toys, right? So each one of those is a voucher worth redeemable for $1 worth of something. They're all one-to-one. Well, you've created a vector pointing exactly in the direction of the national currency, right? You're basically saying these are all valued relative to the national currency. We're not using the national currency, but we've used that as our valuation. We're using the current market rates. A lot of community groups, that's where they start. And what they have the opportunity then to do is start to decouple. They can say, oh, well, actually, we don't want to go with the market rate for childcare. We want to double that, you know, or we want to change that seasonally. So that sort of transition path to start to point in your own direction. And then as, you know, you aggregate many of these pools together across the network, you end up with, you know, a value system that can be quite different from the market economy. Yeah.
That's great. That's great.
Yeah.
Um, Rick, you're up. And then Shannon, before we go into yours, I'm going to actually comment on Susanna's question first, and we'll come back into you, Shannon. So Rick, come on off of, and we'll spotlight up here. Please try to be quick so we can get through much as we can.
Okay, thank you very much. I will be very brief, Bill. Very nice to meet you for the first time. Love the topic. I was triggered to put my hand up by what Tanuja was talking about refugee camps. And I've known this person for about 4 or 5 years who works in Uganda, and I'm just wondering whether you know him or not. His name is Brainy Sabu. If you haven't, I put his link information in the chat, and he's done exactly what Tanuja was alluding to, of creating a sort of university learning in a refugee camp. Now, I haven't spoken to him about 3 to 4 years, but he might be worthwhile looking up to see how far he's progressed with his work. You triggered me to go back and say, what's happened over the last 3 to 4 years? So I just wanted to put in there. I posed a compound philosophical question based upon what you said. I'm not going to read it out. I don't expect you to answer it because we don't have time to. But what I did do was I went into, I use AI to lower our floor of ignorance. And I've just subscribed to Perplexity Max to see how good it is. So I'll put the question in with a link, and I hope you can click on it because it does cite your work. And it gives me an opportunity to do a deeper dive into your background. So thank you. It was just a question of sharing some information, and your work sounds fascinating. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Rick. And no, I don't
Thanks so
know
much.
if Uganda there, but I would love to connect with them. So thanks for the link.
Oh, absolutely. What you're talking about, I thought, wow. I mean, for me to come to you and tell you about somebody in Africa, it's like, I was hoping you knew him, but that just shows you the power of net weaving. So we need to be more effective at net weaving. I'll go off camera. I'll turn off my mic.
Sorry, Rick. I didn't mean to pull you out of that. It's too fast. I hit the button too quick. Shannon, I'm going to pull you out here. Shannon, we're going to go ahead and just do your question just because we're running a little bit out of time. Go ahead, Shannon.
All right, sounds good. I'm off mute. Hey, well, I just have a very specific question about use case regarding the Mueria formula in situations where you have to bring in outside funding for like capital projects, like processing systems, heavy equipment, anything that would allow communities to be able to kind of bootstrap past the level we're at. You were talking about abundance in communities, but sometimes the scale and the scope of what's needed may get bigger than that. I'm kind of curious how this works within that.
Yeah. So right now the rails on blockchain for all this stuff if you want to put money into a pool, or let's say we work a lot with like family foundations. So going from a grant program instead to saying we're going to endow a pool with dollars. That's a resource in the pool that let's say in the refugee camps, the Red Cross is doing some of this where the community is given a credit line to borrow from that money, right? And then they leave their commitment in the pool. The money's gone out, they're using that, and they need to fulfill that commitment with the other community members. So this is kind of like, digesting or composting the national currency into trust networks. And that's been really, really effective and powerful. And usually with some kind of like a caveat that if all you're doing is putting a bunch of money in, they pull it out, and then it just stays stuck there until there's more money pulling in and pulling it out. You're just creating the normal kind of linear traffic jam. Money has to unlock it. So you really want to get into the position where these guys within the network can unlock each other's credit line by working with each other, and then you've basically kind of bootstrapped the Mueria from that perspective, right? So you're going from money in to a relational credit network. The money actually random or infrequent money, because we never have really regular money anyways, that's actually been extremely effective because every once in a while there's money into those networks, or there's people buying commitments from those networks. So there's injection, like a vending machine going on there, but always they have the ability to trade with each other. So that's been a really nice flywheel, if you will, for getting those Mueria type systems started.
Okay, and you're talking specifically about grant funding and money that goes into the Mueria that doesn't come back out, right?
Yeah, so endowments, it can also be purchases from that group too. So the group can say, look, we'll allow people to put money in there to pull out these commitments to do services, right? And the same with like savings and loan groups where they're actually saving in a pool like that together. So that connection between, you know, the monetary version of Mueria, which is super common across all of Africa, like, or even insurance pools where people are putting, or you know, rainy day pools and whatnot, where they're putting money in there and then they say we can borrow that when there's a claim on the insurance, right? You know, to me, the monetary version of this is really, really, really important because it really opens the door for people to actually start uh, going into the non-monetary version of it. And it's the linkage between those two is super important.
Right on. If I can redirect just a little bit, what I'm referring to is capital investment that comes back out. So like if diaspora investments, you've got billions of dollars going into Africa every year, that's 90% of it is usually for food and just temporary stuff. But if you've got an investment flowing into capacity building for the community, and then there's an exit strategy for that that's fundamentally non-extractive, but you're leveraging those resources, not accepting it as a permanent endowment. Have you experienced any situations like that?
Yeah. So people charging fees on the usage of that liquidity in the pool is the most common one. So liquidity provision or liquidity fees would be one way to do it. So instead of like interest bearing lending, you're charging people a fee on access to that or membership fees on that. So just like you would in an insurance program. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you, guys. Joshua, I'm going to have you come out. I think we're going to have time for maybe one last question, guys. I'm sorry we ran out of time. If Will's gracious, we might have him come back and for more questions. Joshua, go. Oh, I saw you just lower your head, though. Come on out if you want
I'm
to.
here.
You got you here. There you go.
I just lowered it because you said me.
Oh, sorry. Yeah.
Are we having a hard stop? Is that what's going on? I see you all stressed out, Sage. Thank you for
I
your
do
time,
have a
Will.
hard stop, so I'm sorry. I try to schedule
Okay.
these for an hour
No
on here,
worries.
and I try to respect everyone's time through this. So I
No worries.
apologize, sir.
Just to keep it brief, then, Michael Linton, Open Money. Are you friends with him, Will?
No, not really. I know Michael and I know his work and he's inspiring for a lot of the community currency world. But I would say most of our work has been, and I think his experience too has been to sort of look at resource coordination modalities rather than currencies over time. So, but I do know of his
Okay, so
work though.
you know
Yeah,
him, just you're not friends with him. Is that what it is?
you're right. Yeah, yeah.
Okay, cool. And then the last thing was just wondering, equity, stocks, futures, all the things that drive the economy in America that actually controls and owns everything from the Bank of London to the Club of Paris, all those things. Are you valuing those things for futures, for equity for these people? Are you giving them
Yeah,
stock in an actual future of something that they own, not something that they borrow, lend, pull, trade? Is there any equity?
no, I mean, you can create systems like that. I mean, the tooling's very, very sort of like axiomatic. You can build those types of systems if you want to, but mostly we're acknowledging commitments for goods or services. That's it.
So no equity.
And no, you can have revolving credit lines, but we haven't done anything like derivatives or shares or securities. I mean, even with a pool, you could create a token that you say is redeemable for whatever's in the pool, and then the pool could have nothing in it. So at that point, it's, you know, like you're introducing a lot of risk and a lot of kind of like um, uh, not very good scaffolding for building on top of. So those instruments are, you know, they're not always bad. There's a lot of stuff you can do with it, but our focus has been like, what's the foundation in brick and mortar there. So that we've tried to avoid that kind of stuff as much as possible. Even currencies themselves, we try to avoid, right? Like if someone comes to me and says, I want to make a community currency, the first thing I'll say is, can you guarantee it, or do you have any commitment behind it whatsoever? And if you just want to make an algorithmic token that you go and you just create millions of them, there's no actual commitment there. Instead, it's a speculative concept that you hope, like Bitcoin, you hope everyone's going to accept it. Usually, I just carry on doing something else.
Yeah, I think there was a lot of words there. I'm just talking about ownership of something. Is there any possibility of owning something that you own that you can pass down to generations and you can pull together as a community that we all own together? Something that creates equity that I say, I own this building. I'm going to give a brick to everyone in this building. So we all own a brick. A physical ownership of something.
Yeah.
We're confusing equity though with resource pools though. How would we define equity across resource pools when we're trying to
That's my point, is that
define?
resource pools don't have equity. They're just pulling resources together, and that's ephemeral. It's gone.
Yeah.
Is there
You'd
any
have,
equity of something that you own?
yeah. You'd have to, in our case, generally, you'd have to explain it as a commitment. So are you making a commitment? And if you're going to pass that commitment down, what does that really mean exactly? So that your child's going to take on the commitment, and if that
I'm
commitment are giving you access to resources, does the community that's giving you access to resources still want to do that?
I'm saying, coming out of the thumb of a creditor debt situation where a country is in debt to another country, can they own their country and push out that debtor and say, I will not pay your debt. I own my country, and whatever you think I own, give me that dollar amount or that credit amount, and I will pay that. And then we are no longer in business together. Is there
No.
any kind of
So
trajectory towards that where I own the sovereignty that is my country or my village or my life, my liberty?
So if you find yourself in debt, and you're in a pooling situation with others, and you want to say, no, I don't want to be in that debt situation anymore, but I don't believe it's even my debt. I don't want to pay it off anymore. And you know, all systems have failed. Well, what we do is make sure that you are free to make your own pools anywhere you want. So if you don't want to access that pool anymore at all because you know you're in complete debt there,
I guess
you're
you're not
totally
hearing
free
me.
to make another one.
I
Yeah.
apologize. Maybe I'm not clear. I'm saying the exact opposite of what you just said. I'm saying I do want to pay off that debt. Not only do I want
Yeah.
to pay it off, I want to pull together all my other fellow citizens that are, you know, we'll all get thrown in jail if we don't pay that debt, or we'll get bombed like Libya did. I'm saying I want to make
Yeah.
a system where we all say we all individually owe 200,000 US dollars, and we will all
Yeah.
pay that off in our lifetime so our children don't have to pay that off. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that's beautiful. I mean, so in that case, that you accept dollars for your services, is paying that off, right? So if there's outstanding dollars, you know, with a whole bunch of debtors around the world, and you say we're willing to absorb those through our goods and services, you are doing that.
Yeah, I think you're making it more convoluted than it needs to be. You will kill
Guys,
me
I
if
think
I
this
don't
needs to
pay
be a
it.
sidebar.
Yeah.
And then
Yeah,
maybe
sorry,
once
I
you guys come up with
apologize. Maybe we
something,
can
maybe
talk
you can
another
bring it
time. I
back to
don't
the
mean to
group
take
and
up
sort of
everyone.
propose something. So I think
Yep.
what we're also doing too is we're trying to take one system and say, well, what if it worked this way? So I think this is maybe a little bit of a brainstorming session that we would need a little bit of time and possibly resources, and maybe even a little bit of research ahead of time so we can bring the right people to it. So I appreciate the question and I appreciate the thought around that. However, time and place, I don't know if this is the best for this. So what I'd like to say then is Will, let's wrap this up. What are ways that people can get in touch with you? And if they do have follow-on questions, which you can see, chat is just going crazy on here with a whole bunch of questions and thoughts around this. Well, what's the best way people can engage with you?
Yeah, email's good. Will at grassecon.org. I'll stick it in the chat there. There's a Substack, willruddick.substack.com. That's where the book is as well. There's also a grassecon.org, grassecon.substack.com as well. Those are really good. And yeah, happy to do more sessions with you guys. And yeah, just send me an email, and I can also send you guys a Google Calendar as well. But yeah, lovely to be on here. Lovely to go deeper into all this as well. Yeah.
I appreciate it, Will. I appreciate it so much. I appreciate your time. Guys, I hope you got a lot out of this. One thing I want to kind of hit on is in the purpose of this time, we tried to explain a complex system that's built on knowledge before all of us, right? And in this case, Will is working to adapt this in a community that they're vulnerable. They might not have the economic means. So this is in lieu of that. How do you still keep people occupied? How do you still prevent resource extraction from individuals and men leaving that community and going to other places where there are money? How can you still make the daily life happen in lieu of not having the economics for some of that when you are in really impoverished areas? And it's worked. And it's not only worked there, but Will has been, they went to trial. The bank system came after them and charges were dropped. And then they were able to scale this around the world on a number of different community pools, looking at tackling a number of different problems. So I encourage you guys, spend more time looking at the resources. I've dove in very, very deep, and there's a lot of knowledge. Will has been very graceful with putting all of his information out there, and there's a lot of networks of information around this type of these topics. So, Will, thank you so much for coming on. I hope we represented well, and I hope I hope you got some good questions out of this. And everyone, I hope you guys enjoyed this and got some good information.
Thank you, Sage. Thanks, everybody.
All right, everyone. I'm wrapping up, so I do need to close and bounce over to the next one. So thank you all for showing up. Next week, we have Russ Christensen coming on, who's talking about how to build employee ownership that will last. So if you're interested in employee ownership and someone who has a wealth of experience in building employee ownership cooperatives and how to build cooperatives that really stand the test of time, by all means, show up next week, and it should be a great discussion. Thank you all so much. Thank you, Will.
Right.